What is the true measure of a man? Is it the balance in his accounts, the Patek Philippe on his wrist, the hushed reverence he commands in boardrooms, or is it something quieter, something hidden in the past? For Alexander Sterling, a man who could move markets with a single word, the answer arrived on a Tuesday evening, not in a stock ticker, but in the tired eyes of a woman he hadn't seen in 15 years. She was holding a tray of empty wine glasses, wearing a cheap black apron. And in that one shattering moment, his billion-dollar world collided with a life he thought he'd left behind forever. This isn't just a story about wealth, it's a story about debt, the kind money can never repay. The restaurant was called Aurelia, a name whispered among New York's elite. To dine there was to announce you had not only arrived, but owned the destination. Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations, sat at the best table, a corner booth upholstered in deep cobalt velvet. The light from the crystal chandelier overhead caught the ice in his glass of Macallan 25, refracting a tiny cold rainbow onto the crisp white tablecloth. Across from him, two associates, Robert and Chen, laughed at a joke he hadn't fully heard. He was nodding, a practiced automatic gesture. His mind was elsewhere, churning through the final details of the Helios project, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition of a green energy startup that would cement his legacy. At 33, he had it all: the penthouse on Park Avenue, the jet, the portfolio that was the envy of Wall Street. He wore a custom Brioni suit that fit like a second skin and a watch that cost more than the average American home. His world was a fortress of calculated risks and spectacular returns. It was also profoundly lonely. His fiancée Camilla Rochester was supposed to be here. She'd cancelled via a breezy text message, "Air kiss stuck at a charity gala, fitting, darling. Don't have too much fun without me," which he knew meant she was having a more socially advantageous dinner elsewhere. He didn't mind. Their relationship was much like his business deals, a merger of mutual interests. Her family had old-world prestige. He had new-world power. It was a perfect, passionless contract. "More wine, Mr. Sterling," a sommelier murmured, materializing at his elbow. Alex waved a dismissive hand. He was tired of the fawning, the endless parade of people who saw him not as a man, but as a walking, talking vault. He scanned the restaurant, his eyes flicking over the patrons, the hedge fund managers, the tech heiresses, the art dealers, and felt a familiar wave of detachment. That's when he saw her. She was clearing a table near the service entrance, her movements quick and efficient, but heavy with an exhaustion that seemed to settle in her bones. She wore the standard Aurelia uniform, a simple black dress, a starched white apron, and sensible black shoes. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a severe functional ponytail, but a few loose strands framed a face that hit him like a physical blow. It was thinner, etched with fine lines of worry around the eyes that hadn't been there before, but it was unmistakably her. The slight upturn of her nose, the determined set of her jaw. Sarah Jenkins. The name echoed in his mind, a ghost from another lifetime. A lifetime of worn-out textbooks, shared pizzas in a cramped dorm room, and dreams that seemed as vast and limitless as the night sky over their state university campus. Sarah, the brilliant art history major, who could talk for hours about the brush strokes of Caravaggio. Sarah, who had a laugh that could make you forget you were broke and facing midterms. Sarah, his best friend, the girl he'd secretly been in love with for 2 years before he transferred to Wharton and promptly lost touch, swallowed by his ambition. His breath caught in his throat. Robert was talking about market projections, but the sound faded into a dull hum. Alex couldn't look away. He watched as she stacked plates, her expression a careful neutral mask. But he saw it. The flicker of pain when an arrogant customer snapped his fingers at her. The deep, weary sigh she let out when she thought no one was looking. This couldn't be right. Sarah was meant for greatness. She was going to curate a gallery, discover the next big artist, live in a loft in Paris, surrounded by art and beauty. She wasn't supposed to be here in his world, clearing away the scraps from his table. "Alex, are you with us?" Chen asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Alex blinked, forcing his attention back to the table. "Yes. Sorry." Lost in thought. He took a sip of scotch, the liquid fire doing nothing to calm the storm in his chest. He had to do something. He had to say something. But what the meal concluded. Handshakes were exchanged. Robert and Chen left, melting back into the city's neon glow. Alex remained. He told the maître d' he was waiting for his car, but his eyes were fixed on her. He watched her for another 10 minutes, a spectator to the quiet tragedy of her current life. Finally, seeing her head towards the back, he stood up, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He intercepted her near the swinging doors to the kitchen. "Sarah." She stopped, her hand on the door. She turned slowly, her eyes, the same shade of clear, intelligent blue he remembered widening in disbelief. Recognition dawned, followed by a complex cascade of other emotions, shock, confusion, and then, unmistakable and sharp, a deep, mortifying shame. She instinctively smoothed her apron, a gesture of profound vulnerability. "Alex Sterling." Her voice was a whisper, raspy and uncertain. What are you doing here? I was having dinner." He said the words, feeling utterly inadequate. "Sarah, it's been a long time." 15 years, she supplied her voice, gaining a bit of strength, a bit of its old, direct quality. Her eyes flickered over his suit, his watch, taking in the chasm that had opened between them. A wall instantly went up. The vulnerable waitress was gone, replaced by a woman cloaked in rigid pride. "Well, it's a surprise to see you." The kitchen door swung open, and a burly chef yelled, "Jenkins Table 4 wants their check split 3 ways, and they're complaining about the corkage fee. Move it." She flinched. "I have to go," she said, her gaze darting away from his, unable to meet the pity she was sure she'd find there. "Wait," Alex said, his hand moving as if to touch her arm, but he stopped himself. "Can we talk? After your shift?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Talk about what, Alex? The good old days? I don't think so." She pushed through the doors without a backward glance, leaving him standing alone in the opulent hallway, the scent of expensive perfume mixing with the distant clatter of dishes. He felt as if the entire gilded structure of his life had just cracked, and through that crack he could see a past he had ruthlessly forgotten, and a woman he had unforgivably left behind. The drive back to his penthouse was a blur of city lights that usually energized him, but now felt hollow and mocking. The Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the streets of Manhattan with a silence that was deafening. Alex stared out the window, but he wasn't seeing the iconic skyline. He was seeing a cramped college library, Sarah's head bent over a book, a stray lock of blonde hair falling across her cheek as she chewed on the end of her pen. He was hearing her voice, animated and passionate, as she argued about the merits of impressionism versus expressionism. How did that girl, the one with a fire in her soul, end up here, clearing tables for men like him? When he arrived at his penthouse, a triplex temple of glass, steel, and minimalist art, the silence was even more profound. He walked past a multi-million-dollar Gerhard Richter painting without a second glance. The view of Central Park, a glittering carpet of darkness and light, offered no comfort. He poured himself another scotch and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows. the conversation brief as it was replayed in his mind, the shame in her eyes, the hard protective shell she had pulled around herself. That wasn't just the embarrassment of being seen in a waitress uniform. It was something deeper, a wound she was determined to hide. His ambition had been a voracious, all-consuming thing. After transferring from their state school to Wharton, he had cut ties with his old life, viewing it as baggage. It was a calculated, cold-blooded decision. He'd told himself it was necessary for success. He'd changed his number, ignored the few emails Sarah had sent, and plunged headfirst into the cutthroat world of finance. He had convinced himself that looking back was a sign of weakness. Now that weakness felt more like a gaping moral failure. He spent a sleepless night haunted by the ghost of their friendship. By morning, he had a resolve as steely as any he'd ever had for a corporate takeover. He wasn't going to let this go. He had his assistant, a sharp and discreet man named David, find out her schedule. It was depressingly easy. She worked double shifts at Aurelia 4 days a week and picked up odd catering jobs on the side. There was no social media presence, no digital footprint to speak of. It was as if she were trying to be invisible. He also found her address, a 5th-floor walk-up in a tired-looking building in Queens. The contrast with his own Park Avenue address was a physical ache in his chest. He decided against sending a car or an assistant. This was something he had to do himself. 2 days later, he waited in his sedan, a deliberately understated Audi, not the Rolls parked down the street from Aurelia. He watched the staff entrance as the last of the kitchen crew left smoke from their cigarettes, pluming in the cool night air. Finally, just after 1 a.m., she emerged. She looked even more tired than she had in the restaurant. The professional mask was gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. She pulled a thin coat around her shoulders and started walking towards the subway station, her pace brisk and determined. He pulled the car up beside her, the electric window humming down. "Sarah!" She jumped, startled, clutching her bag to her chest. When she saw him, her expression hardened. "Are you following me, Sterling?" The use of his last name was a deliberate barb. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice even. "Please get in, I'll give you a ride home." She eyed the sleek, dark car with suspicion. "I'm fine with the subway, thanks. It's late and it's starting to rain. Don't be stubborn. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." She hesitated, looking from his face to the darkening sky, where a light drizzle was beginning to fall. With a sigh of resignation that seemed to carry the weight of her entire week, she walked around and got into the passenger seat, pulling the door shut with a soft click. The opulent leather and quiet interior of the car seemed to make her uncomfortable. She sat ramrod straight, her worn handbag clutched in her lap like a shield. He drove in silence for a few blocks, the wipers beating a gentle rhythm. "How have you been?" he finally asked, knowing how stupid the question was. "I'm a waitress at a fancy restaurant. How do you think I've been?" She retorted, her voice sharp. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Alex. What do you want?" The directness was so familiar, it almost made him smile. "I was worried about you," he said honestly. "When I saw you, it wasn't what I expected." "And what did you expect? That I'd be running the Met by now?" She laughed, but it was a brittle, unhappy sound. "Life doesn't always go according to the 5-year plan we made when we were 20. "What happened, Sarah?" he pressed gently. "The art, your passion for it. You were brilliant." Her knuckles were white where she gripped her bag. "Things happened. My mum got sick. I had to come home. Plans changed." Her tone was clipped a clear, "do not enter" sign. He knew he was pushing his luck. He took a different tack. "I want to help." That was the wrong thing to say. Her head snapped toward him, her blue eyes flashing with a fire he remembered all too well. "Help you want to help." She spat the word out as if it were poison. "I don't want your charity, Alex. I don't need some billionaire to sweep in and fix my life because he feels a pang of guilt for disappearing for 15 years. It's not guilt." He lied, though it was partly true. It was more than that. I saw my friend, and she looked like she was hurting. That's all." "Your friend?" She scoffed. "Friends don't just vanish, Alex. They don't stop answering emails. They don't just cease to exist. You made your choice a long time ago. You chose this." She gestured around at the expensive car at the city he owned, over everything else. "So you can keep your pity and your money. I'm doing just fine on my own." He pulled up in front of her building. It was even more run down than he'd imagined, with graffiti on the adjacent wall and a flickering light over the entrance. The sight of it hardened his resolve. "I'm not going to just walk away, Sarah." "Yes, you are," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. She opened the car door, letting in the damp night air. "You're an expert at it." She got out and slammed the door, not looking back as she disappeared into the building. Alex sat there for a long time, the engine humming softly, the rain now falling in earnest. He had just tried to close the biggest deal of his life and been brutally, unequivocally rejected. And for the first time, he realized this wasn't a problem money could solve. This would require something he hadn't used in a very, very long time, his heart. Alex's world operated on a simple principle: identify a problem, formulate a strategy, execute. Rejection was merely a temporary obstacle requiring a new angle of attack. Sarah's pride was a fortress, and his direct assault with an offer of help had been a catastrophic failure. He needed a Trojan horse. He spent the next day not at his office, but in his private library, a room he rarely used. He had David pull every piece of information he could find on the contemporary New York art scene gallery, openings, artist profiles, market trends. He wasn't just skimming. He was studying, trying to remember the language she spoke the world that had once been her dream. In the process, he stumbled upon an old digital folder on a backup drive labeled College. He clicked it open. There were dozens of photos of him and Sarah laughing over cheap beer, posing goofily in front of campus landmarks, a candid shot he'd taken of her in the art studio, completely absorbed a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. Looking at them felt like looking at a different man, one who smiled without calculation, whose eyes weren't shadowed by the weight of a corporate empire. Then he found it. A short video from their sophomore year art show. Sarah was standing next to a large, vibrant, abstract canvas she had painted. It was a riot of color and emotion, bold and full of life. Even on the grainy footage, her passion was palpable as she explained her technique to a professor. "It's about the tension between structure and chaos," she was saying, her hands moving as she spoke. "How the things that bind us can also be the source of our greatest freedom." An idea began to form. It was audacious, risky, and could easily blow up in his face. It was perfect. The Sterling Foundation, his company's philanthropic arm, was about to open a new headquarters in a stunning modern building downtown. The lobby was a vast, minimalist space of white marble and glass, with one massive empty wall designated for a signature art piece. The board had been pressuring him to commission a work from a big-name artist like Damien Hirst or Jeff Koons, a safe, predictable choice that would signal their cultural status. Alex called an emergency meeting. "We're changing direction on the lobby commission," he announced to the startled foundation board. "We're not going with an established name. We are going to commission an emerging local artist, someone with raw talent who needs a platform." The board members exchanged nervous glances. "Alexander," said an older gentleman named Philip Crane, "our donors expect a certain caliber. An unknown artist is a significant risk to our brand. Our brand is about innovation. Alex countered his voice, leaving no room for argument. It's about finding potential where others don't see it. This is perfectly on brand. We'll frame it as a competition, a city-wide search. But I already have a candidate I want to personally invite to submit a proposal. He knew he was strong-arming them, using his power in a way he usually reserved for hostile takeovers, but he didn't care. That evening, he didn't go to Sarah's apartment or wait outside her work. Instead, he sent a professional courier to her door. Inside the sleek portfolio was not a check or a pitying letter, but an official, embossed request for proposal from the Sterling Foundation. It detailed the project, a large-scale commission for the lobby of their new headquarters. It outlined the theme, the intersection of technology and humanity, and specified the generous artist's stipend material budget and the final acquisition fee, which was a life-changing 6-figure sum. Tucked inside was a simple handwritten note on his personal stationery. "Sarah, this is not charity. This is business. I saw your work once a long time ago, and I never forgot it. I believe that talent is still there. The foundation is looking for a unique voice, and I thought of you. Whether you submit a proposal is your decision entirely. It will be judged on its merits by the Accusations Committee, just like every other submission. No matter what, I would be honored if you would consider it. Alex." He had deliberately made it impersonal professional. He'd included the detail about the committee which he controlled to give her a shield for her pride. She could see this not as a handout from him, but as a legitimate professional opportunity. For 2 days, he heard nothing. The silence was agonizing. He found himself checking his phone constantly, a nervous tick he hadn't had since his first hostile bid years ago. Camilla, his fiancée, noticed his distraction over a rare dinner together. "You've been a million miles away all week, darling," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on her champagne flute. "Is the Helios deal in trouble?" "No, everything's fine," he replied, pushing a piece of truffle risotto around his plate. "Well, you should come out of your cave. The Van Astor Gallery opening is tomorrow night. Everyone will be there. We need to be seen." She smiled, a dazzling, empty gesture. Just as he was about to give up hope, an email arrived. The sender was simply S. Jenkins. The body of the email was brief and to the point. Subject: Sterling Foundation Commission Proposal. "Mr. Sterling, I have reviewed the RFP. I am interested. Please forward the full submission guidelines and deadline. Thank you, Sarah Jenkins." Alex read the email 3 times. Mr. Sterling. The formality was a suit of armor, but she hadn't said no. She hadn't torn up the proposal. She had taken the first step. He leaned back in his leather chair, a genuine, uncalculated smile spreading across his face for the first time in years. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. Now he just had to hope it wouldn't be seen as a declaration of war. Sarah's acceptance was the beginning of a delicate, fragile dance. She quit her job at Aurelia almost immediately, a move that told Alex more about her desperation and hope than any conversation could. He arranged for the artist's stipend to be paid up front, routing it through the foundation's anonymous payment system so it wouldn't feel like it was coming directly from him. He knew she would need it for rent and supplies. They communicated strictly through formal emails between her and the Foundation's Art Committee liaison, a role David, his assistant, now expertly played. Sarah submitted a stunning proposal, a concept for a massive triptych that would use layers of traditional oil paint combined with embedded subtly glowing fiber optics, representing the clash and harmony between human touch and digital code. It was brilliant, thoughtful, and exactly what the space needed. The committee unanimously approved it, Alex arranged for her to have access to a large, sun-filled studio space in a building his company owned in Chelsea, telling her it was part of the foundation's support for the commissioned artist. The first time he went to see her there, under the guise of a formal project check-in, he found her transformed. She was no longer the weary waitress, dressed in paint-splattered jeans and an old t-shirt, with her hair tied up in a messy bun and a streak of cobalt blue on her cheek. She was vibrant. She was in her element, surrounded by massive canvases, sketches, and the sharp, clean scent of turpentine and oil paints. The fire, he remembered, was back in her eyes. "The scale is ambitious," he said, looking at the 3 enormous canvases that dominated the room. "The theme is ambitious," she countered, not missing a beat. She walked him through her sketches, her voice regaining its old passion. She spoke of light and shadow, of the cold perfection of algorithms, and the messy, beautiful chaos of human creation. He found himself listening, truly listening, in a way he hadn't with anyone in years. The walls of formality began to crumble slowly. They started talking about the old days. Tentatively at first, then, with more ease. They laughed about a terrible philosophy professor they'd both had. He reminded her of the time she'd tried to dye her hair purple, and it had turned a swampy green. She reminded him of his obsession with a terrible obscure indie band. For the first time since he'd seen her at the restaurant, they were just Alex and Sarah again. This tentative reconnection was not going unnoticed. Camilla Rochester was no fool. She had built her life on observing the subtle shifts in power and attention among the elite. She noticed Alex's frequent meetings in Chelsea, his improved mood, and the way his eyes lit up when he mentioned the Foundation's art project. Her jealousy, cold and sharp, was piqued. Using her social connections, it took her less than a day to find out the name of the emerging artist. A quick, discreet background check revealed Sarah's recent employment at Aurelia and her rundown address in Queens. To Camilla, this wasn't a story of second chances. It was the story of a gold digger. She decided to pay a visit to the studio herself. She arrived one afternoon, dressed in a runway-fresh Chanel suit and impossibly high Louboutin heels that clicked menacingly on the concrete floor. "So this is the workshop," Camilla said, her voice dripping with condescension as she surveyed the creative chaos. She looked at Sarah, taking in her paint-stained clothes with a look of distaste. "You must be Sarah. I'm Camilla Rochester, Alex's fiancée." She emphasized the word fiancé, letting it hang in the air like a declaration of ownership. Sarah, caught off guard, wiped her hands on a rag. "It's nice to meet you. I was so intrigued when Alex told me about this little project." Camilla continued, circling one of the canvases. "It's very noble of him, really, taking a chance on someone with your background. It must be quite a change from waiting tables." The barb landed exactly as intended. Sarah's spine stiffened. "My background is in fine art, Ms. Rochester. That's why the Foundation hired me." "Of course," Camilla said with a saccharine smile. "Alex is just so generous. He has a soft spot for strays. You just have to be careful not to take his kindness for something more. He's a very busy man, with very important responsibilities. This project is a lovely diversion for him, but a diversion nonetheless. I wouldn't want you to get the wrong impression." The threat was veiled but clear. Sarah felt a cold dread mix with a hot surge of anger. Before she could formulate a reply, Camilla's eyes landed on a series of charcoal preliminary sketches pinned to a corkboard. Among them were several expressive portraits of Alex that Sarah had sketched from memory, trying to capture the man he was now versus the boy he had been. Camilla's smile tightened. "How intimate. You've really captured his likeness," She turned to leave her point made. "I'm sure the finished piece will be adequate. Do try not to disappoint him." The visit left a toxic residue in the air. Sarah's old insecurities, the ones that told her she wasn't good enough, that this was all a fluke, came roaring back. She felt the chasm between her world and Alex's yawn wide once more. The situation became more complicated a week later with the arrival of another ghost from her past. Her ex-boyfriend, Mark Renshaw. He was the reason her first attempt at opening a small art gallery had failed spectacularly years ago. He had been her business partner, but he'd been cooking the books, draining their accounts to fund a gambling addiction. When it all fell apart, he vanished, leaving her with crippling debt and a shattered heart. It was the final blow after her mother's death, the one that had sent her spiraling down into the anonymous hand-to-mouth existence Alex had found her in. He appeared outside her apartment one evening, looking slicker than she remembered, but with the same desperate, shifty eyes. "Sarah, baby, you look amazing," he said, trying for a charming smile. "I heard you landed on your feet. Big shot art commission. I knew you always had it in you." "What do you want, Mark?" she asked, her voice flat and cold. "I'm in a little trouble," he admitted, dropping the pretense. "Nothing I can't handle. I just need a small loan to get back on my feet. For old time's sake. After all I did for you." "What you did was ruin me," she said, her voice trembling with repressed fury. His eyes narrowed. "I see you're hanging around with that billionaire Sterling. A guy like that. He wouldn't want people digging into the past, would he? Hearing about his new pet project's messy, bankrupt history. It would be a shame if the tabloids got a call." Sarah stared at him, horrified. He was threatening her, using her past as a weapon and Alex's name as leverage. She was standing at a crossroads. On one side was the brilliant future Alex had offered her, a future of art and redemption. On the other were the demons of her past, embodied by a manipulative fiancé and a blackmailing ex, both determined to drag her back into the darkness. The beautiful canvas of her new life suddenly had two very deep, very ugly cracks. The pressure began to mount. Mark's veiled threats became more frequent, a series of wheedling texts and unsettling appearances near her studio. Simultaneously, Camilla's psychological warfare escalated. She would arrange for Alex to be whisked away to some last-minute gala or weekend in the Hamptons, right when he had planned to visit the studio, sending Sarah polite cutting messages like, "So sorry, Alex has been pulled into something dreadfully important. We'll have to reschedule his little art visit." Sarah poured all her anxiety and frustration into the painting. The work was becoming a masterpiece, a breathtaking fusion of color light and technology. The central panel representing humanity was a swirling nebula of rich oils, deep crimsons, golds, and blues that felt alive, emotional, and deeply personal. It was the best work she had ever done. The project was her salvation, and she refused to let anyone tear it down. She finally told Mark to get lost, threatening to go to the police. This enraged him. He saw his meal ticket slipping away. Camilla, meanwhile, was growing desperate. She saw the genuine connection forming between Alex and Sarah, a quiet understanding that she, with all her society polish, could never hope to replicate. Alex was different when he talked about Sarah. He was lighter, more authentic. For Camilla, this wasn't just about losing a fiancé. It was about losing a dynasty. She decided it was time for a final, scorched earth solution. She needed to destroy not just Sarah's relationship with Alex, but her credibility and her art. She made 2 calls. The first was to a disgruntled security guard at the studio building, whom she knew had a grudge against the management. A wire transfer of $20,000 secured his silence and a blind eye for a 10-minute window. The second call was to Mark Renshaw. She had her private investigator dig up his information. He was the perfect pawn, greedy, desperate, and with a pre-existing motive to harm Sarah. "Mr. Renshaw," she said, her voice smooth as silk over the phone, "I believe we have a mutual acquaintance in Ms. Sarah Jenkins. I understand she's been uncooperative. I'm prepared to offer you a sum of money that would solve your current financial difficulties. In exchange, I need a small favor." The plan was cruel in its simplicity. The grand unveiling of the triptych was scheduled for the night of the Sterling Foundation's annual fundraising gala. The city's most powerful and influential people would be there. It was supposed to be Sarah's triumphant return to the art world. 2 nights before the gala, the plan was set in motion. Under the cover of darkness, Mark paid handsomely. Camilla slipped into the studio. He wasn't there to steal anything. He had one simple, brutal instruction. He took a can of industrial-grade paint thinner and a rag. He walked up to the magnificent central panel of the triptych, the heart of the piece. With vicious, deliberate strokes, he smeared the solvent across the canvas. The vibrant oils, months of painstaking work, dissolved into a grotesque weeping smear. The heart of the painting was irrevocably destroyed. He then took a small, distinctive palette knife, one of Sarah's favorites, and dropped it on the floor nearby. He left as silently as he came. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the studio to put the finishing touches on her work. The scream that tore from her throat was one of pure animalistic agony. Her masterpiece, her soul on canvas, was mutilated. The building manager called Alex, who arrived within minutes, his face pale with shock. He saw the devastation, and then he saw Sarah on her knees before the ruined painting, sobbing uncontrollably. And then Camilla arrived, a mask of perfect rehearsed concern on her face. "Oh my God, darling, what happened?" she gasped. "It's destroyed," Alex said, his voice tight with rage. "Someone broke in. Security has no record, no footage." "Broke in?" Camilla said, her eyes wide. She walked carefully around the scene, her gaze landing on the palette knife on the floor. Or perhaps it was an inside job. She looked from the painting to Alex. "Darling, I don't want to say this, but have you considered Sarah herself?" Alex stared at her. "What are you talking about? Why would she destroy her own work?" "The insurance," Camilla suggested, her voice a poisonous whisper. "The acquisition fee is large, but the insurance policy on the piece is for double its value to account for market potential." I saw the paperwork, and think of the publicity. Tortured artist, unable to cope with the pressure, destroys her own masterpiece. It's a tragic romantic story. It would make her famous overnight. "That's insane," Alex snapped. "Is it?" Camilla pressed her voice, full of false sympathy. "I know you want to see the best in her, Alex, but you don't know what she's been through. People with that much debt, they get desperate." She then delivered the killing blow. "I found out her ex-boyfriend has been sniffing around, a gambler with a nasty reputation named Mark Renshaw. Maybe they cooked this up together, a classic insurance scam." Camilla had done her homework. The seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of Sarah's known financial struggles, and Mark's reappearance began to take root. Alex looked at Sarah, who was now staring at him, her tear-streaked face a mixture of grief and disbelief at Camilla's accusation. He was torn. His logical risk assessment brain was whirring, processing the data Camilla was feeding him. Desperate people did desperate things. He saw it in his business every day. "Sarah," he said, his voice strained, "is there any reason at all you'd do this?" The question, the slight hesitation in his voice, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, it was more painful than the ruined painting. It was a complete betrayal. She had thought he saw her, the real her. But in the end, He was just like everyone else. He saw the poor ex-waitress, the charity case. She slowly got to her feet, her tears stopping, as a cold, hard anger took their place. "You really have to ask me that?" she whispered, her voice shaking with hurt. "After all this—" He didn't answer, his face a mask of conflict. That was enough. "Get out," she said, her voice rising. "Both of you. Get out of my studio. Get out of my life." She turned her back on them, unable to look at the man who had given her a second chance, only to snatch it away at the most critical moment. Alex stood there frozen as Camilla gently took his arm. "Come on, darling," she murmured. "Let's go. She's hysterical." As she led him away, she cast a single triumphant glance over her shoulder at Sarah's shaking back. The canvas was ruined. The artist was broken. The victory was hers. Alex left the studio feeling hollowed out. Camilla's logic had been insidious and compelling, playing on every cynical instinct he had honed in the business world. But seeing the raw, shattered look in Sarah's eyes, it didn't align with the profile of a cunning fraudster. It was the look of genuine, soul-crushing loss. The dissonance tore at him. Back in his penthouse, Camilla was playing the part of the supportive fiancée to perfection, pouring him a drink, her touch gentle on his arm. "I know this is difficult, Alex. You invested so much in her. It's a terrible shame she turned out to be such a disappointment." But her performance was a little too perfect. A small, nagging detail surfaced in Alex's memory. When Camilla had mentioned the insurance policy, she'd quoted its exact value relative to the acquisition fee. That policy was a confidential part of the Foundation's contract, known only to him, the Foundation's legal team, and Sarah. How would Camilla know that specific detail? He brushed it off as a lucky guess, but the seed of his own doubt had been planted. The next morning, he called David, his hyper-efficient assistant, into his office. David had been with him for years and possessed a quiet, shrewd intelligence that Alex trusted implicitly. "David, I want you to do a deep dive into Camilla Rochester," Alex said, his voice low. "Everything. Financials, phone records, associations. I want to know who she's been talking to for the past month, and be discreet." David, who had always harbored a quiet dislike for the vapid Camilla, simply nodded. "Consider it done, sir." While David began his digital excavation, Alex did his own. He couldn't shake the image of the ruined painting. It was more than just vandalism. It was personal. The damage was targeted, focused on the most emotional human part of the work. It was an act of symbolic murder. He went back to the studio, which was now sealed as a potential crime scene. He convinced the building manager to let him review the security logs himself. As Camilla had said, the camera overlooking the hallway outside Sarah's studio had been malfunctioning for a 10-minute window between 2:05 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. Too convenient. He pulled the logs for the building's main entrance. There he found it. At 1:50 a.m., a man in a baseball cap, his face obscured, had entered. He left at 2:25 a.m. It wasn't much, but then Alex cross-referenced the service elevator logs. An unscheduled use was recorded at 1:55 a.m., going up and again at 2:20 a.m., going down. The elevator was in a blind spot from the lobby cameras. It was a professional entry and exit, not the work of a hysterical artist. Meanwhile, Sarah was in her own personal hell. The accusation on top of the destruction of her work had sent her into a spiral of despair. She was packing her few belongings into boxes, ready to crawl back into the anonymous hole she'd been in before Alex found her. Then her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Heard about the accident. Too bad. My offer of financial help still stands. I bet Sterling is done with you now. You need me. The sheer audacity of it snapped something in her. The grief and hurt coalesced into pure, white-hot rage. She wasn't that broken girl anymore. The last few months of rediscovering her art and her strength had changed her. She typed a reply. "Meet me at the coffee shop on the corner in 1 hour. We need to talk about your offer." She put her phone on voice record and slipped it into her jacket pocket before she left. At the same time, David walked into Alex's office and placed a thin file on his desk. "You were right to be suspicious, sir." Inside were bank statements and phone records. A wire transfer for $20,000 from an offshore account owned by Camilla to the security guard who had been on duty the night of the vandalism. Another larger transfer of $50,000 made the morning after the incident to an account belonging to one Mark Renshaw, and the phone logs multiple calls between Camilla and Mark in the days leading up to the attack. It was all there, a neat, tidy pattern of deceit and conspiracy. The betrayal was so cold and calculated, it made Alex's blood run cold. In a small, grimy coffee shop in Queens, Sarah sat across from Mark. "So," he began smugly, ready to be reasonable, "I want to know who put you up to it." "Mark," she said, her voice steady and calm. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed. "Destroying my painting. Who paid you?" she pressed. "It had to be someone who wanted to hurt me and hurt Alex. Someone who knew about you. It was his fiancée, wasn't it, Camilla?" Mark's smug expression faltered. "You're crazy." "Am I?" Sarah leaned forward. "Let me explain what happens next. I take this recording." She patted her pocket. "And the threatening text messages you've been sending me. And I go to the police. Then I go to Alex Sterling. You think his fiancée, with her high society reputation, is going to protect a low-life gambler like you when you can drag her down with you. She will cut you loose and feed you to the wolves. You'll be facing charges for extortion and destruction of property. But if you tell me everything right now, maybe I only go to Alex. Maybe we leave the police out of it." She was bluffing, but her voice was pure steel. Mark looked at her truly, seeing the strong, intelligent woman she had become. He saw the corner he was in, and he folded completely. As Mark started confessing, Alex was already in motion. He held the file from David in his hand, his knuckles white. He was a man who hated being played, and Camilla had just made the biggest miscalculation of her life. He was heading for a confrontation, but it wasn't with Sarah. It was with his fiancée. The reckoning was coming. The Sterling Foundation Gala was in full swing. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a glittering spectacle of old money and new power. Men in tuxedos and women in couture gowns mingled under colossal chandeliers, their laughter tinkling like wind chimes. Camilla Rochester was in her element, a radiant queen holding court. She wore a stunning blood-red Dior gown, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat. She accepted compliments on her poise, her beauty, her impeccable taste. To everyone there, she was the perfect, unshakable partner to the formidable Alexander Sterling. Alex arrived late. He moved through the crowd with a chilling, predatory calm. He ignored the greetings, his eyes locked on Camilla. When he reached her, he didn't kiss her cheek. He simply said, "We need to talk, now." He led her not to a quiet corner, but to the small, elevated stage at the front of the room where the orchestra had just taken a break. The sight of the two of them on stage, away from the festivities, drew the attention of the room. A hush began to fall. "What is this, Alex?" Camilla hissed, her smile faltering as she felt the eyes of New York society upon them. "You're making a scene." "Am I?" he said, his voice dangerously low, but carrying in the sudden silence. He held up his phone, and a voice filled the ballroom. Mark Renshaw's voice, tinny and pathetic from the recording Sarah had made. "She paid me. Camilla Rochester. She said to make it look bad, to ruin the painting and make Sarah look unstable. She transferred the money right after. A collective gasp swept through the room. Camilla's face went from pale to ashen. The colour drained from her cheeks, leaving her as white as the tablecloths. "Alex, don't," she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. That's a lie. He's a criminal." "Is this a lie?" Alex continued, his voice now ringing with cold fury as he held up a printout of the wire transfer from her offshore account. And this, he held up the record of her payments to the security guard. "You didn't just try to frame an innocent woman. You used the Sterling Foundation's name to do it. You tried to sabotage a project meant to uplift an artist, all because of your pathetic, greedy jealousy." He turned to face the stunned, silent crowd. "The unveiling of our commissioned artwork was supposed to happen tonight. That won't be possible, as the piece was maliciously destroyed. However, the purpose of this foundation is to fight against this kind of darkness and cynicism." He looked back at Camilla, his eyes filled with utter contempt. "Our engagement is over. My security will escort you out." Humiliated, exposed, and utterly defeated, Camilla was led away, the whispers of the city's elite following her like a funeral dirge. Her social reign was over. Alex left the gala without another word. He drove himself not to his penthouse, but to Queen's. He found Sarah in her apartment, which was half-packed in boxes. She had the recording saved but hadn't known what to do with it, still feeling too beaten down to fight. He stood in the doorway of her small, sparse living room, looking utterly out of place in his tuxedo. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't offer pity. He just laid the truth at her feet. "I have the confession," he said, holding out a file with the full evidence he'd gathered. "I have the bank records. I know everything. And I am so sorry, Sarah. I am sorry I ever doubted you, even for a second. You were my friend, and I failed you. I was so caught up in looking for angles and betrayals that I couldn't see the truth right in front of me." Sarah looked at the file, then back at his face. She saw no arrogance, no pity. She saw only deep, profound regret. She saw the Alex she used to know the boy who believed in things hidden beneath the billionaire. "What now?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Now," he said, stepping into the apartment. "We fix it. My legal team will handle Mark. Camilla is already history. But the art, that's on us." He looked at the half-packed boxes. "Don't do this. Don't disappear. Please, let's rebuild it. Better. Stronger." She looked at him, a long, searching look. And then, for the first time, in what felt like a lifetime, she gave a small, genuine smile. "I'm going to need a lot more paint." The next few months were a blur of activity. The story of Camilla's plot and Sarah's exoneration became a minor scandal in the art world, which only served to heighten anticipation for the real piece. Alex gave Sarah a new, bigger studio and an unlimited budget. But more than that, he gave her his time. He was there not as a patron, but as a partner. He'd bring her coffee, listen to her talk about her vision for hours, and sit quietly and watch her work, mesmerized. She decided not to replicate the destroyed triptych. Instead, she created something new, something born from the fire. The new piece was bolder, more defiant. At its center, where the ugly solvent smear had been, she incorporated a Japanese kintsugi technique, filling the scars on the canvas with veins of molten gold, making the point of damage the most beautiful and strongest part of the piece. 6 months later, at a specially arranged event, the painting was finally unveiled. It was more than a masterpiece. It was a statement of resilience. The art world was rapturous. Critics lauded it. Museums made offers. Sarah Jenkins was no longer an emerging artist. She had arrived. After the crowd had thinned, Alex and Sarah stood alone in the lobby, looking at the magnificent work glowing on the wall. "You know," Sarah said, turning to him, "for 15 years I thought of you and felt angry. Angry that you left. Angry that you succeeded while I failed. I was a fool," he set his eyes on her. "I spent all that time building an empire, and I almost missed the only thing that was ever truly valuable." "It's not too late," she whispered. He reached out and took her hand. It wasn't the hand of a billionaire taking pity on a waitress. It was the hand of a man who had finally found his way home. Their fingers intertwined a comfortable, perfect fit. Together they looked at the painting, a testament to their shared past, their broken present, and the beautiful golden future they were about to build together. And so Alexander Sterling learned that his greatest acquisition wasn't a company, but a second chance. Sarah Jenkins taught him that true value isn't something you can trade on the stock market. It's forged in loyalty, resilience, and the courage to mend what's been broken. Their story reminds us that beneath the labels society gives us billionaire, waitress, success, failure, we are all just people searching for a connection that makes us whole. It's a powerful lesson that the past is never truly gone, and sometimes the people we knew when we had nothing are the only ones who can remind us of who we truly are. If this story of redemption and second chances resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps our channel grow. Share this video with someone who believes in the power of forgiveness and new beginnings. And of course, if you want more stories that touch the heart and explore the depths of human connection, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.